Welcome to Geek Out session number 9, where today we will be geeking out to Life Reset, EvP, Environment versus Player. This is book 2 in the New Era Online series. I am your host, Carl Williams from Geek on My Sleeve, where we embrace our inner geek and proudly wear it on our sleeves or shirts or foreheads or wherever you want to wear your geek. So, Life Reset EvP, the author summary. After defeating the Hobgoblin threat, Orin is now faced with an even more tenacious enemy, the players themselves. His old guild has discovered his village location, and a deadly strike force is closing in. With time running out, Orin must build up his clan and recruit an army of monsters if he's to have any hope of withstanding the coming attack. For those of you not familiar with our Geek Out sessions, spoiler warning ahead, we will be discussing, analyzing, geeking out over Life Reset EvP, the second book in the series, so there will be spoilers. If you want to abort now, go ahead, read the book, come back, check this out later, leave your comments and thoughts about the book below. And for those of you joining us live, thank you for being here and feel free to chime in. Today, I have Peter Williams joining me once again. He was kind enough to do book 1 with me, and next Sunday we'll be doing book 3 in the series. How we doing, Pete?
Hello. I'm doing well. I haven't read over book 3 yet, but I'm very excited with the scaling between book 1 and 2. I purchased
Yeah.
it, just got to go through it.
Yes, I have already gone through book 3, and no spoilers on book 3, but the scaling continues, and it's well done. So, yeah. Book 1, we finished fighting off the Hobgoblin threat, uh, built up the village. We're in a good place. At the beginning of book 1, Orin has kind of embraced his life in Neo, and has also kind of just embraced his role as chief, right?
Yeah,
Pursuing
he's gonna
pursuing
have
his
to.
romantic interest. Sorry, go on.
I think that's more for book 2, but yeah, there's a little kindling that'll be getting there.
Yeah.
For me, the big key points for 2 was like right at the end when he's being tortured and he kind of, he gets that trait. Oh, I forget the name of it. It's like mind over matter or something where he has a reduced pain threshold and he sacrificed Barska on the altar, sanctifying his first shrine for his deity and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, but yeah, book 2, as you said, the scaling continues, right? Pretty early on, we get another uh, boss mob for the clan where he promotes Reinar to tier 1, um, which creates some interesting challenges later throughout the book. He becomes the champion instead of just mindless org and gets VC seated or VIC seated. Um,
He's a big point, or he ends up spending the extra energy, which he's been so conservative on, to boost his the levels of his abilities. I forget the wording, up into like apprentice or something, so that it gets additional um, things with his abilities, which then really helps with our first engagement when they get found out by the scouting force.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. He really falls into his role as chieftain. And early in the book, we see his struggle with what is reality, right? He thinks of himself as a goblin, as the dread totem. Um,
Yeah, we kind of see that at the end of book one, where after being tortured and all the excruciating pain and all the realism that Fiverr has the potential to be, and it really being a torture dungeon for him or whatever, he finally, the way he gets his new trait, um, he fully accepts his role. He fully accepts that this reality is a reality, and he kind of takes it on as it's his reality, which throughout book two, we find out that with Tom and Jerry, with his caretakers on the outside, he then has achieved a 99% connectivity or CCP with the game, which is the second highest in record. And it's then how in book two we really see him flourish for, reading the metadata or reading
right.
into the traits and everything a lot more. Um, Vic, the VI, plays a very crucial role for keeping him, in check and, reeling him back in after he gets over the top.
Yeah, it's interesting all those different elements there, right? Because the more integrated he becomes with the game, he's able to start going through the metadata himself, like literally not having to bring up menus anymore, just plucking the information from the air, quote unquote. And so he gets more integrated with the game and he accepts that VIs are like sentient, right? They're beings. They may not be flesh and blood, but as he kind of like comes to accept that more and more, he kind of denies his humanity and whatnot. And Vic, at times, like the meat bag jokes almost seem a bit over the top, but I feel it's Vic's way of saying, "Hey, remember, you're a meat bag. You're not part of the game." And there's moments early on where he's like, "What game? I thought we're past this. This is our world. This is our reality." And Vic as his companion is kind of like, "Well, actually, there is a world out there." Um, but yeah, it's interesting following that part of his journey through the early on in the books, and like even with the fight early on where they have the scouting party um, with the dwarf and all those guys. It's what they call them, travelers versus players.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And he starts kind of resorting to that mindset, calling them travelers.
yeah, yeah, and so not so we have that first encounter where we get to see his new boss in action as they go and they take on the group of players, and we go through all that and he's immersed in the game, and it's not until later where he gets a reality check from his buddy that he went to school with, right? The
Yeah,
what's his
Tal.
name? Yeah, Tal, who works there.
I can't remember his in-game avatar's name.
Yeah, but it's actually Vic who intervenes on his behalf, right? Because he sends him a message and he's like, "Hey, I need to talk to you right away, and send me your location." And Vic goes and acts on his own, sends the location data to I think it's like Superwolf 23,
Yeah, yep.
his buddy, and he's pretty much just stalling him long enough to stay in one spot until his buddy can encapsulate
Use
him in
that,
his
yeah,
time
that bubble
bubble.
on him again.
Right.
And then I think throughout that conversation with him, he's there like an hour. And, Oren's like, oh my God, then, that's a whole day, this, that, and the other. And he's like, well, you did come up with new and innovative ways to, try to kill me.
Right. Where he was just non-coherent or whatever. And even after his little reality check, he keeps second guessing himself. Like,
He's on the fence
yeah,
for a lot of it.
was this a ploy all along? Was he trying to delay me? Right?
Or yeah, the convenient timing of everything. Right after he interacts with the players or the scouting party, then all of a sudden, his buddies contacting him and stalling and making sure that he
Hmm.
can't progress or do anything with it.
Right. And Tal comes through for him again, right? Gives him the
Yeah,
dimensional trade orb marketplace with an export house attached for exporter. Like that really comes to save his bacon later on in the game, being able to export his inventory surplus to get some of those unique items like glass and what was it, coal for when he was
yeah,
crafting
coal
items
and
later on.
the metal and all that, which is kind of our next little segue, isn't it? When we meet the gremlins. And, he's like, oh, hey, what about this? And they're like, well, sorry, we're more for individual people and blah, blah, blah. And we're not a trading expedition. But then,
Right.
we end up figuring it all out. And that trade orb really helps us.
Yeah. And they're able to get some unique items through the gremlins as well. And it's certainly a nice perk for when more of the travelers slash players show up later to
Yeah.
have some gremlins able to sell them unique items to keep them interested. Uh, and the village finally gets to that point, right? Book one, we just had the two players, the twins. And in book three, I forget, I think at one point it was something like a quarter of the settlement growth, I believe.
Or book
They're allowed,
two. Yeah. When
or
he
yeah, in book
says,
two.
you've got approved to be a starting area just to
Hmm.
keep it in check. We're only going to do a quarter of your population or whatever.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, but yeah, one of the nice things about the intervention too was after the first attack, um, Oren was really stressing it out, right? Because his old guild was the top guild with players in the 200s range, where they barely survived an attack from. I think the scouting party were in their 20s and then one level 40, right? And they just
Sounds about right.
barely survived that encounter. And he's like, what are we going to do with a full size raid of 200 plus level players? And while going back and forth with Tal, he's like, "Come on, think like a player here. Would you really want to give up all that money and time to just go raid some low-level goblins or whatnot?" He pretty much says like being cast into a goblin might be your saving grace because nobody's going to take it serious,
Yeah, lose a
right?
lot of credibility with the guild,
Mm-hmm.
which
And
they're already on a downward spiral because they have none of the prime badges.
right, right, as well as a number of other things. But yeah. So the gremlins come, they get that set up. They start working on building the export office. Uh, Early on in the book, we kind of get a little bit of a snapshot into what's going on behind the scene where they have an interlude with the company meeting. And we find out that, oh, no,
I forget how it's worded, but pretty much they're trying to uh, recoup some of their investment off of Orin being spawned here. And in book one, we hear about how they had to essentially create a giant, more of the world and a bunch of backstory and a bunch of extra
mm-hmm,
stuff. And then also the new time dilation is a new way to play. And it's something fresh and new and unique. And they're trying to recoup on it. So they're trying to see if they can get it approved to subjugate people to the time dilation and
mm-hmm,
to see if people with higher CCP connectivity will be able to utilize it. But the thing that caught my attention is the way they word it. It's pretty much like yes, we still have a lot of safety concerns for the player or the human, but because of all our NDAs and because of what we had Oren sign, worst case scenario, we blame it all on him. We're off scot free on that aspect, and if it goes well, we can just cash in on it.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And they're monitoring the other players too, and
yeah,
there's
their biometrics and seeing what all's going on.
yeah, and they're getting some red flags, but pretty much like you said, legals, oh, we got everything covered in the NDA. Let's keep doing this. And we find out that like they have military experts involved in all this and everything, kind of hinting at there might be more to this.
Yeah, which is kind of something, side note that we see day to day. Everyone's like, oh, the Call of Duties were a training exercise or whatever for their forces, and it got released to the public to desensitize us and
Yeah.
whatever. Which I mean, accelerate being able to train at accelerated 12 times the speed, and then also just like the full immersion for how he got tortured and the sense of all that without actually really being in danger would be crazy.
Oh, absolutely. 'Cause
Super soldier status to a degree.
yeah, and then like you said, with the accelerated time and whatnot, just think about any and all job training or education, right? If you could literally get 12 times more um, time or experience out of your hour, uh, that would be crazy.
Yeah,
Do your job training or your schooling in virtual reality. Though, as the players come in, they seem very adamant that that's the last thing they want to do, because we see that some of the players who have the higher CP are actually bigwigs in real life,
yeah,
right? Where
but you
go,
see kind of both sides of it where our first chick or whatnot, she's astronomy. And she's like, "Oh, I don't have time to game. I would really like it." And so, yeah, she's trying to get away from it, and she's got her new role she's playing, and or I guess they're on the same side. Then we get the next guy, the bugbear or whatever, who is an architect or
architect.
yeah, architect in real life, and he's like, "Oh, I
Hmm.
know building schematics, this, that, and the other." And Zuban's like, "Oh, you know how to do research?" And he's like, "No, but I know what this is."
Right.
And then he comes back and he's like, "Wow, that was a new low for me." Explaining building schematics to goblins.
Right. Thought about taking the easy XP and just throttling them right
Yeah,
there, but decided he'd rather get paid. But yeah, and then they talk about a couple other people where they're scientists or like data scientists.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, the players really end up helping, at least in the beginning, because they get recruited pretty early on by the merchant when they're trying to buy stuff, and they give them the opportunity, right, to work for the clan, and it really helps with the village scaling, because you see that with like some of the building where they go and they do construction and the village pays for it, and then we see that again later on, where you were talking about offline how motivated the players were to get like their arena up and running, right?
yeah.
And yeah, like I could definitely see that as a gamer.
And Oren talks about it a bit when he's like, "Oh, well, players can level so much quicker," and we run into a lot of that for the second book where starts with an M. One of the twins. Anyway, the male twin is a blacksmith. So there's a lot of stuff that loot that we find, and he's like, "Oh, I don't care. It's all yours. Just use it at our place because he knows it will
Yeah,
be beneficial."
yeah, and they negotiate the best for both of them, right? Warren
Yeah,
gets
he
something
gets
crafted out of the
XP,
deal.
and then yeah,
Yeah, yeah, which I don't know, reminds me of some of like my guild runs with other people. It's like, yeah, you need to level stuff up. Well, like let's figure out how to make this work. You take that, I take this. At least you don't have to type slash roll to
uh, yeah, that was another funny point where Hoshiku or Hoshiku. anyway, the female twin, sorry for butchering the name, is looking at like a new pair of boots, and he's like, "Oh, I'll roll you for it," but he didn't look very convinced about it himself. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The game humor and jokes and references that come out through the book definitely gave me a bit of nostalgia for my MMO days. Um, but yeah, and then monster versus monster action, right? We have a new boss tier, Rhino, and he kills
challenges
the
him.
chef. Yeah. Well, he kills the chef first, and then Orin realized the Dread Totem, like, okay, I gotta put this guy in my place. Right after he invites the gremlins to come eat in the mess hall. And
Yeah, making a scene and a little more of their fears for why they didn't want to set up trade relations in the first place.
exactly, exactly. And yeah, so then our big old chief has to put him in his place and throw down, right? And Rhino just completely massacres the mess hall. And if you think about it, yeah, he's a higher boss tier, but when doing a solo battle, you basically have your glass cannon versus your um, gladiator type champion, right?
Yeah,
And we get to see the combat going back and forth there. But of course, our chief prevails. But one of the funny things that just like the little laughs is as he's going through and trying to uh, reason through getting ready to challenge Rhino. You have Vic who jumps off him and basically turns his hands into pom poms and starts like cheerleading. So you have this purple goblin cheerleader for this deathmatch challenge.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's when we started meeting some of the newer players, right? So it's just an odd spectacle.
oh yeah. I don't know if they
Or
were
maybe
there
it
at
was
that
just
point.
the twins.
That was you're thinking of the other death match
Okay.
where later on in the book when the twin sister challenges him. That's
Oh,
when
okay.
you
Yep,
have the
that's when
mob
everybody's
god.
there.
Right. Right. This was just the gremlins. Of course there's always an audience for a dual challenge. Um but yeah, then a little bit later we get introduced to Penelope, who is basically just like this 19-year-old, as they describe her, like they're smart people and then they're smart people, and that's her. And she's a bigwig and for some science field, but she got approved for the military grade capsule and logs in and meets Kedrick. And one of the first quests she gets is Brains. Kedrick, the administrator of Goblin's Gourds, has asked you to bring him a living, intelligent humanoid creature to eat. And it it's
It's
a
kind of funky watching her work through the mechanics and all that because first off, she's a big wig for doing whatever. She's trying to get away from that. She really creates a new persona, and
mhm,
I think she says like she knows she's gonna come back, but then she also has that moment where she's like, "Oh, and I can't leave this guy unfed."
right.
She,
How
yeah,
she justifies it.
yeah, she goes back and forth between like, "Oh no, I can't have him torture this, sentient being and this, that, and the other." And she says when she played Nero prior, she didn't really involved in any combat,
Yeah, she just leveled
which
up her flower picking skill, right? And hung
yeah,
out.
which we don't learn until later. But I don't know. It also kind of sets up a good thing when she's walking through the town and she runs into Reinord, and that's about to
Hmm.
go down, and then freaking Gooba saves her, and then
Right.
she confides in Gooba, and she gets the next quest where she's like, oh hey, how do I get a weapon? Oh, what kind of weapon do you want? Oh,
Right.
I don't want to get too close, and ends up getting a bow, and
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people, when they go to virtual reality, they go there to escape, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people assume a different role, and I think it could be for a variety of different reasons. Like the twins are super intelligent, but they're physically handicapped, and they'll talk about how the sister, I think, was described as by her brother as like follow the rules, Miss Nice Girl, where in game she plays this
Kind of
I don't know,
flirty assassin.
yeah, this flirty badass assassin who like a little adrenaline junkie. And the brother, he's obviously very, very smart. So is his sister, but he just likes to play this hulking brute, like me smash sort of a deal. Like, okay, let's go, let's kill stuff, let's, et cetera, et cetera. And you see that with a lot of the different players. They want to escape reality and assume these different roles.
Different personas they put on.
And a handful of them really embrace playing for quote the bad guys, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well, he has to correct them a little bit, but yeah.
right, yeah, not really bad, but yeah. Let's see here. And then pretty early on, the twins and Orin team up to take on the fort, right? That was a pretty big.
Yeah, and he's trying to explain to him, "Hey, I need your help with this," without going through the full details of, "Oh, this is actually this epic level quest for sanctifying these shrines and this, that, and the other." And he has a couple close slip ups where he's like, "Oh, I had this vision." Oh, whoops! I didn't mean to say that. There were some prior foreshadowing knowledge in this quest update that I got that dictates, there's going to be a badass boss, demon, whatever at the end.
hmm yeah, there were several moments where um, he really slipped up. I think like Vic, I forget which part it was, but he's like, oh, I think it was he said traveler instead of
Yeah, yeah.
player,
Instead of players,
and
and
he's
she's like scrutinizing him, and he's trying to think of something, and
yeah, Vic's like, think of something clever. It's like, come on, boss, think of something more clever. Hurry up now. Which just only goes to further feed her suspicions, right? Because she,
yeah, she's eyeballing him. Think,
after he put down Rhino, she challenged him, um, and he kind of brushed it off. And part of the agreement to go to the fort was he would duel her afterwards, right?
yeah, yeah, and I think it's been going since book one. Pretty much since they're super smart, they thought it was a ploy for the company to develop a AI or a very intelligent, AI to interact with players, which we
hmm
see a little bit of that and how she's planning to duel him in book one to see if her player counter goes up or if she gets XP. Which then he ends up weaseling out of it because he's got a fail safe, get out of jail. I didn't actually die, and the way he words it to 0 health
Yeah,
for when the duel happens.
yeah,
I enjoyed our little dungeon crawl. It was good. I have those moments where it was like, oh, nothing like overwhelming odds to bring people together.
exactly. Bonding on your dungeon crawl, and the combat through it was great. You got to see a lot of typical MMO type dungeon mechanics, right? Where they have that one room with the demon and all the pools of just like different demons and everything, where you just rush in and you're overwhelmed. Well, you can't do that. So they step out. We get to see the Dread Totem do a little bit more of his rune crafting on Malkir's axe and glove, which was kind of cool. Like,
That was also a big pinnacle or point where he finally had to stop or he stopped using the kind of like overlay or design software stuff, and he
mhm,
finally like actually was putting it or integrating it into the weapon or armor itself, and it just kind of had this epiphany throughout it, which was pretty cool to see, and it really plays a pivotal role in developing the clan later.
right? As he goes through and kind of grinds out all those rune enchantments for his soldiers. But yeah, again, like he's just becoming more and more immersed in this game. Um, it kind of makes you wonder what it's going to be like for him when he's no longer in there 24/7, right? You
Well,
know,
I yes and no. I feel like so it's not something that happens in this game in particular, and I think, once he gets through it, he'll be kind of able to log out like everybody else, and they'll be able to swap his character over to where he's like the other travelers or the other players. But again, this is all theory craft. I think he's going to. There's another book we just listened to where his character stays in game and someone else is able to take it over, and that'd
mm,
be cool if Vic could like act
oh
out and continue
yeah,
to grind and be there because like you can't say someone does raid it, you can't just not have your boss there, but other players, they're just random mobs throughout it. It's not a big deal if they go away. So there's a scene where Orin is trying to figure out his shadow puppet, but he
hmm
can't, his meat suit processor or brain isn't designed to operate both, and Vic ends up taking over, and he's like, "No, I can't control you," but because he released it, anyway, theory crafting, I'm enjoying that, and yeah, it's gonna be
I
different.
I could see that, and that would be a great way to answer it because Vic was originally supposed to go on his body, right? When he got
Yeah,
promoted to Dread Totem. So for him to be able to log out and Vic kind of well
pilot for a
he
little bit.
yeah, he even has an ability that allows him to do that, right?
Yeah, yeah, possess corpses or whatever.
Yeah. So I could see that. Um
Anyway, so it's kind of cool how they first run in and they're overwhelmed. They strategize, they rune craft, and
right.
then you know we get to see a little bit more of from book one where he's got Barska's book, the demon, whatever. And that's how he's able to understand and figure out the pools and how to resonate with them. And that
But
way they can, take out the ads before taking on the main boss.
that ends up throwing up more red flags for him though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, with Hosiku or whatever. Because
Uh,
she's like, oh, hey, can I see that? And he's like, oh, yeah, sure, trying to get on her good side. And she's like, this is all gibberish. I have no idea what you're looking at. And it just gives me some prompt to if I want to cast a spell. And he's like, oh, well, about that. Yeah, I'm awesome.
right. Um Something I thought was funny. I think it's a book. It might have been the Chalice, but like one of his appraise skills ends up leveling up where he kind of gets like a ballpark for how much things cost. And I think it was like the book was 666
Yeah,
for its
yeah.
appraised value.
Kind of
It's
fits into the whole demon,
yeah, but
play.
I don't know. It reminded me I don't know. I put way too many hours into World of Warcraft back in the day, as well as other MMOs, and just like those little Easter eggs or little, slight nods or references that you find
Yeah,
throughout the lore or the items, um, give you a little bit of a chuckle. But yeah, the I enjoyed the dungeon crawl. We got to see a lot more game mechanics. We got to see some weapons come out, the twins and the Dread Totem bond. We run into dwarves for the first time, right? I don't think we had any
yeah.
actual NPC dwarf interaction, so the world itself is getting a little bit bigger. Um,
And we learn a very crucial part with that how goblins are despised, hatred with every other race, but
mhm,
due to the dwarfs being captured or imprisoned and them doing an act of kindness, they're able to go up from hatred to another level that allows them to open, communication, which is exciting for the future.
right.
Yeah,
Especially moving forward, trying to interact with other different races and whatnot. But yeah, and then while we're going through that dungeon, the brother ended up coming across a really hard puzzle. And then in the dungeon crawl for book 2, they get this probability problem, and I guess that's the sister's wheelhouse. So she has to go and works through some probability problem, and we learned that the previous math problem the brother did was, as his sister says, like just short of genius, and they ended up submitting it to their university, and it makes some algorithms obsolete. So it kind of makes you wonder, why is this video game throwing these super complex problems that only these experts in their fields are able to deal with, right?
Yeah, and the fact that, Orin hasn't ran into any of them, so it's not a typical NPC or monster thing. But yeah, they're recruiting a bunch of bigwigs and, people with degrees, and then they're presenting them with this, which, in my mind, I feel it's just another ploy for them to cash in. You know,
Of
they're
course,
able to figure out different stuff, or yeah.
get free research. Really makes you wonder what all's in that NDA that they get, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah. It sounds like it's pretty restricting if it's anything like what Orin got.
Yeah. Yeah, I think at one point they even talked about how they might have updated it. But yeah, so we go through, we get to meet dwarfs. Our dread totem gets his very own mount, Tempest.
That was pretty
Uh,
cool.
yeah, that's
And
pretty cool.
we also he starts to resort back or revert back to his the game influencing him so much, because with the dwarfs he has that hatred, because they're a hated or a mortal enemy of the goblins.
Right.
And as soon as we start getting attacked by the wolves, he's not doing anything to help them. And you have that kind of back and forth with the brother twin, where he's like, "Hey, help him out," and he's like, "Oh, those wolves are doing just fine." He's like, "I didn't mean them. I meant the dwarves."
Yeah.
So
Yeah. But it like you said, it really shows how much he's reverted back to a goblin, where his first thought isn't as a player, right?
oh yeah,
Maxing out his
so
XP, maxing out everything. It's just, oh, yeah, like let the dwarves die, like racial hatred.
and you have
Um,
Vic chime in with, "Hey boss, the reward goes up the more that survive," and he's like, "Oh yeah, those rewards."
yeah,
Finally
yeah.
snaps back.
So they get the dwarves out. Kuzai stays with them as they go towards the final boss, right? And when they finally get to the boss, before that,
Yeah, we have all the loot that we find. They're looking around, and
mhm,
they find all the stuff for the forge. It used to be a dwarven settlement or whatever.
yeah, get a little portable anvil for Malkir to take, and they find a crumpled note where it goes to Jawbreaker or Chieftain. As we agreed, for lending me your warriors, I'm sending you a gift of great power. In this package, you will find a chalice and a blueprint for a shrine. Build the shrine in a dark location, then place the chalice on top and fill it with your blood. This will summon a demon of great power that will grant you strength beyond your wildest dreams. Barska Demon Eye.
Which that explains how Barska was tricking other bosses into sacrificing themselves. It
Mhm.
probably had something similar with the way Orin's getting his power from Annihilator, sacrificing, and that way Barska was collecting all of it to level himself up.
And building shrines to
Yeah.
extend the power, right? Um, So we see that where it's Jawbreaker is the Orc Chieftain, and then we get to quote the final boss, and we see Jawbreaker, a level 2 possessed demon, and the description's pretty basic. And Orin's like, oh, that's weird. Usually there's a unique description for a final boss, and this is a chief, so on and so forth. And then they go and they start fighting, and all of a sudden this impossible ranked level boss shows up with the custom description. It's like, oh, there it is.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
it wasn't truly the boss. Another thing that was kind of cool is after he dies, quote unquote, he has his boss tier 2 thing trigger where he's a ghost or he's not able to interact, and it's get out of jail free card.
Right.
He then turns on his different view or different sight, and he sees all the metadata or the tendrils going off, and he notices that one's going off to a different spot. And then finally, when she shows up, it's like, oh, okay, here's the description of the actual boss, and
Mhm.
that's who was controlling the other guy
Yeah.
or Jawbreaker.
Being able to interact with the metadata really helped him out throughout the book. Um, but yeah, sorry, flipping through my notes here. Um,
So, and then it was kind of, we this new boss pops up, and there's not a shot in the dark that we're going to be able to do it. We see where he's more interactive or still immersed in the game because, oh, what's the male twin's name again?
Malkir,
Yeah, Malkir gets a debuff that says he's charmed or whatever, and he can't interact. But then Orin gets like
I think it was seduced, right?
yeah, seduced, where he's actually acting on behalf of the demon, and they're like, "Wait a minute, you can't do that. That only happens with NPCs." So, you know, more turmoil where they're like, "Is he really an NPC or not?" And then
Right.
we get Vic to somehow interact and break him free.
Good old Vic saves the day again.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it looks hopeless because it's like a rank 6 boss or whatever. And then good thing we had the dwarf, and good thing the dwarf is a priest. We were able to have him try and sanctify the shrine, which then is going to starve her of the power, and so they can defeat her.
Right. It really lucked out that they had a priest of the light, or however they worded it, because he's able to counteract or fight against the dark style shrine. And then after he gets seduced, they go through all that. Orin goes and sacrifices both the light priest and the demon on the shrine, and it shows that Annihilator has a sense of humor because he pretty much I guess how to
Binds
describe
them.
it. Yeah, their soul essence mixed when they were sacrificed. So he decided to keep it that way and basically like respawn him as this like demon dark disciple,
Yeah.
um, who likes to talk about himself or whatever in third
Yeah,
person.
or how's Vic put it? There's a couple screws loose, or there's something wrong with that one, that puppet.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then
And
again,
that's
it's
where we get the cool power for the shadow clone or whatnot, and how we
yeah,
have the problem with it. Um,
because he leaves his shadow clone there for the shrine. That way, he can go back and help raise the Dark Temple, right? Because I wants to be there for the Dark Temple, so he shows them the shadow
yeah.
clone trick. Is that before or after he turns himself into a demon and explodes into a million pieces and
Oh,
feels every bit
I
of
I
it?
don't.
He I
No, no, no. Okay, so he does the shadow trick first. He's like, oh well, Kusai, sorry, you're gonna have to stay here. And he's like, no. I'm not going to stay here. Does the shadow trick. And then as he's about to turn away or leave, his eyes like, hey, aren't you going to, offer up stuff to the shrine? Aren't you going to consecrate the shrine? And he's like, no. And then he finds the chalice. And yeah, Vic's like, that doesn't sound right. Don't do that. And he's like, oh, I'm going to get stronger.
Yeah.
He puts his blood in it. He gets, buffed up or whatnot. And, they're having the dialogue with Vic. And all of a sudden he explodes.
Creates a crater on the ground.
Yeah,
Blows
kills
up
Vic
his
again.
awesome purple companion. And basically Kazai just keeps healing him over and over again. He said like he was still screaming from pain and agony. Um,
Oh
it's,
yeah, because the ring he got from Barska was the only thing that
that's
kept him
right.
alive because he already burnt his other get out of jail free card, and that's where he's like, I'm not going to use this ever again. If I die once, he's got his boss, tier 2 thing, which doesn't inflict pain and kind of separates him. But
Hmm.
oh man, if he didn't have that resilience from being tortured prior, he probably would have gone crazy from that, from feeling all your atoms spread across.
I think at this point, by definition, he probably is crazy. But yeah, it makes you wonder how he
Well,
hasn't like completely just snapped.
you see it happen in reality too. Like traumatic events happen to people, and their body reacts or adapts or finds a
Hmm.
way. Like you have, I guess war veterans, for example, PTSD. They've experienced something traumatic, and they have certain triggers that kind of flashes them back into that life or death or fight or flight, moment where they've got to react.
Right, right. Um, but yeah, they get through the fort fight. We have a new boss for the clan, and we meet the mob squad, which we talked a little bit about, right? Where they have a dwarf priest, a bugbear, um, Misa, uh, and then
Cat girl
uh,
Racia.
yeah, yeah. But they all start. Raistia or Penelope started a little bit before then, but then they get an actual full party, and we
Yeah.
get to see a little bit of them as they go through and do some construction. Um, the bugbear, I think it's Foxy, gets recruited to um, do some of that research, right? He got offered his pay double.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So they're trying, there's not a whole lot of starter gear. They don't have any gold. There's nothing to grind. So they're trying to figure out how to advance. And
And most of the
finally,
low
the
level
merchant,
mobs have been cleared out, right? That was part
yeah,
of
because
the
they're
other
on a
challenge.
organic life cycle to where they haven't respawned yet and they're all on the
Hmm.
same. So the trader guy ends up being like, hey, if you work for us, if you help us develop our settlement, um, then we'll pay you. And that's when he ends up going and talking to Zuban, or they run into him for some reason, and he's looking over them, and he's like, "Oh, building schematics or something." And yeah, Zuban's like, "Hey, I'll raise your pay if you help me out with this."
Right. So the players help out. Um, at least at first, it seems like they're going to be nothing but help, right?
Yeah, yeah, because while oh, who's the bug guy? The bug guy ends up communicating with him telepathically, saying, "Hey, we got new people." Orion's like, "Hey, go ahead and give him quests to help further the development of the town." And
Hmm.
then, that's when we first really meet up with the mob squad and get to see them helping with building schematics and building different stuff. She picks up the log, it's in her inventory, and then she puts it on, and that's
Yeah.
where Racia kind of gets that sense of accomplishment. She's being a part of the foundation and the development of this little town.
Yep. Yep. Um, but yeah, then as that's going on, we're also building up the settlement, doing what we can to recruit more soldiers. And as he recruits his soldiers, he still makes it a point to go through and sacrifice them, right? His lucky
I think
bastard.
that's a little later. The next thing I really remember was um, Reinhorn killing the cook and challenging him, right?
I think
Or
we
was
covered that.
that
That was earlier.
okay?
Um, but
Anyway, there he's made a vow to say, "Hey, if you keep developing and growing with us, you'll never truly die." That's when he starts going through the whole ceremony. Or
mhm,
actually, doesn't he do the whole like show of power bit where he gets all the new travelers together and he gets all the resources for the shrine, and then he's like, "Hey, I need everybody over here." He pays the energy points to finish the shrine, and then he activates the night blessing.
yep.
Just kind of as a like display of power.
Yeah, I think it was like shortly after they finally got the export office or whatnot going, they're able to trade I think it was like glass or something they needed for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you're right, I think they do might be even like a quest or whatever. And he when they do that big display of power, that's when the twins are the first players to officially get accepted to the
Oh yeah,
clan
read
like a
friendly
glove.
and get accepted.
And they all become dark touched, right? It's not just all hail
Or
our
yeah, shadow touch or
sh-
whatever, where they
yeah,
get like a bunch of bonuses.
mm-hmm. And they switch over. Is that yeah? I think that's when they switch over to nighttime, right? Once they become shadow touch, then they get all the bonuses for working at night. So their sleep cycle becomes sleep during the day and stay up at night.
Yeah,
Um,
there was I can't remember now. I think they already had the shadow touch trait
it just
or
becomes
in book one, but now since it's always night, they get like a bigger buff.
okay, okay, but
Anyway,
yeah,
it's
once you
a great
become
thing to help us develop.
yep, yep, and once they become part of the clan and get the shadow touch, then their night vision increases, um, as well as the debuffs for the soon-to-be attacking players, which is kind of nice. The main reason why they wanted to do the Dark Temple, right, was to get that up and get the debuffs going and make their guys stronger, the enemies weaker.
That was
Um,
another good point where Oren's kind of in despair, and Vic, he's kind of like standoffish to Vic after they get attacked by the first party, and blah blah blah. And then Bet comes in, and he's like, "Hey, I prayed at shrine, and this thing happened, and make it nighttime everywhere." Blah blah blah. And he's not doing it very well describing it, and Oren's just like, "What is going on here?" And Vic's like, "All right, come on." Figure it out. There's
right,
a skill that you can get with your faith points that sounds an awfully lot like what he's saying. And and yeah,
Vic once again to save the day.
yep.
But but yeah, and then he starts outsourcing some of his quests, right? One of the biggest challenges was finding a way to do it all before the players attacked because they're pretty much counting down the days where the accelerated time helps them. Um, but like their earliest estimates, I think it was like 2 weeks or something like that.
I can't recall, but yeah, or 2 weeks for the first wave.
Right. So they he goes and he outsources the retrieve the totem piece quest
Eh,
to the mob squad.
Or I thought it was a twofer. It was the totem and sanctify the shrine.
Yeah, I think he gives that to them later.
Oh, okay, okay.
So the first quest was to go and retrieve the totem piece to kind of help him out. Um, So, once again, they're all excited, like, oh, you can grant quests because it was explained to them that he's an alpha player, right? An alpha test
Yeah,
player.
alpha tester.
And they're in the beta. And so he can do things that other players can't, but he gives them the quest, um, boosts the rewards, and, it all seems nice and dandy
Till the
um,
betrayal,
until
where
the
it ends up
betrayal.
two of his goblins end up dying or being killed.
Right, about halfway through the book, we get our first big betrayal where two goblins are dead. And it's not like a huge setback, but still, like every energy point counts, every food piece counts, so on and so forth. So it really didn't really set them back, but I felt like it set Oren back more mentally with just how he felt about the players and everything.
Yeah,
So
but I think actually that's why he bounced back, and that's when he started naming all of his mobs and trying to sacrifice them on the shrine if they didn't go through. That way, if something like that happened, he could always get them back.
right,
He would never just straight up lose all the resources.
right, right. Because if they're VI seated, then they could be resurrected.
Yep.
So another quick side note, I always find it interesting the swear words that books like to use, right? So just the frequent shadow crap that gets thrown throughout it. And I think there was even time where the Dread Totem didn't use shadow crap, and Vix like corrects him. He's like, "Don't you mean shadow crap, not just regular crap?"
Yeah.
But it's always interesting how like different books come up with their own little swear words or whatnot. Um, but yeah, so uh, with the sacrifices, the lucky bastard skill really helps him out. But the couple times he did it, he was ranging between 60 to 70%. So even though he's doing all this recruitment, he's still losing a lot to just the naming ceremony. Though he gets some points for the sacrifices, which is nice.
Yeah, which helps him with his faith points. But
Mm-hmm.
when they go out and they do the expedition where they get all the Rhinor and the other goblins, and he's kind of power leveling them as they're taking on the Oxarians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
He gets a lot of
this
the meat.
this book really takes him to a village, right? Because they get the barracks, they get the arena, they get the weapon and armor smiths later on, and the workers. So like he's really finally getting some of his um, crafting slash development settlements. He goes from just one construction crew to two construction crews, and has was it Zuban oversee both construction crews as well as keep up with like some of the research,
Yeah.
um, building up his army, working on his rune crafting, and building up his soldiers, armor and weapons, as well as doing the Exarian um, power leveling, which it was fun to follow because like at times you're so immersed in the game where it's just like a fantasy game, but there was still a lot of those game mechanics that held true. Like when he was trying to figure it out at first and fighting you know, he did the bulk of the damage, right? So then he
Yeah, he
got
took all the XP, and then it was a Rhinorg or whatnot, and he made it so he can only do one hit,
right.
to make it count. And also for putting the non-combatants in his raid party, even though they
Mm-hmm.
weren't there, they're still benefiting.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you see the master strategist in a lot of ways to, okay, this is a guy that was leading the top guild before he got overthrown, right? He, in a lot of ways, he's constantly trying to figure out how to maximize his time, maximize his.
Resources that he has. Another cool
Hmm.
one was the taunt debuff or whatever. The taunt.
Yes,
Um, the
he
taunt no longer works. Can't think of the
right.
word for it.
His troops are resistant or more
Yeah.
resistant to taunts, and he goes through and he gets a handful of different upgrades that later on, when they're fighting the players, you really see how that helps them. And by actually getting his soldiers with VIs where they can learn, they actually learn how to fight players and travelers as well, which again helps them out later on. Uh, um, as they go and they get the barracks, there's the
Arena battle.
well before that,
Yeah.
the dragon player with
Oh,
the
yep.
dual katanas, how he basically, by having his troops fight him and train with him, he pretty much like offers him this ongoing quest. It helps level up their combat skills that much quicker. And he's constantly going back and forth between where he does the power leveling to raise their level, but levels doesn't translate into combat experience and combat skills. So then they have to go back to the barracks to work on leveling up their combat skills and rinse, repeat, um, all
Yeah.
trying to.
They had kind of a funky dynamic where they're facing the Octarians, yes, but he just froze them.
Hmm.
It wasn't true combat.
Right, right. Um,
I was pretty cool with the dragon player, how the world kind of changes or develops around you. And because he was such a hardcore role player and he felt that he was this reincarnated self, he didn't get slapped with the goblinoid template.
right.
So that was pretty cool.
The
Yeah.
power of the mind,
Yeah.
right? Um, but yeah, so much of Neo is that because it kind of reacts to the players, right? The ultimate sandbox game. Um, but yeah, leading up to that, the mob squad comes back, right? And
Yeah.
then,
That's where he blames them. You know, we see a little bit of that dwarven hatred or whatever from being an NPC. Kind of triggers
mhm,
him to blame the dwarf and be like, "Oh, I already know who killed my goblins." You know.
right? He jumps at the dwarf, the half dwarf or whatnot, and he denies it, denies it. Um, Vic pulls him back from, hey, you killed my clan, oh, they were just mindless mobs. And they're like, okay, we'll pay the penalty. And he's finally like, fine, for don't worry about the penalty for the resources that you set me back. And he turns around and gives them another quest and ups the rewards. They're like, oh yeah, I'm interested. And then in order for the dwarf to make amends, he wants him to consecrate,
Shrine by sacrificing himself on it,
right.
which is kind of morbid, but is what it is.
So yeah, they go and they get that quest, spend some of their money, take off, and then we go and we keep building, and then the second betrayal happens, right?
Yeah, where Woody dies, and it looks like the sawmill has been tampered with. Um, which shot off the saw blade and killed Woody.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah,
at first it's just like, oh, it was an accident. But then Orin gets down there and he's actually looking at it. And, he shows it to his NPC and he's like, hey, what's it look like right here? And you kind of see that realization. It's like, oh, it's a clean cut. It was sabotage.
Yeah. So there's the second quote unquote betrayal. Uh, and yeah, he pretty much offers a group. How do they phrase it? Basically, offers a quest to
It's like an
everyone.
area quest or whatever.
Find the killers.
Yeah, find the killers. And isn't that also when he's like, hey, if you guys, become friendly with the clan, it will really benefit you. And I think he also, or no, I think that happened before because by the time the second one rolls around, he's pretty ticked off. He's like about
Yeah.
to lose it, and I think he kicks most of them out, right?
Uh, After the third betrayal,
Oh,
he
okay.
does. You're right. The During the initial Dark Temple um, meeting or whatever with the players, he pretty much accepts the twins, says, "Hey, it's beneficial to you," unlocks all these traits, and that's when the sister pretty much like talks over him and he's like, "Go do a bunch of social quests and get your reputation up to friendly, and you're in."
Yeah,
And he's all
yeah.
like, "Hey, you cut off my awesome speech." She's like, "Hush, I'm reading
Uh,
stuff."
or saved him time. I'm gonna save everybody some time.
Yeah, yeah, right. But he's so in character that he wanted to do a speech.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, so the tension's starting to get there. Um, After the second betrayal, but he hasn't kicked him out yet. Um, let's see, we go through a lot more growth. Um, Everybody's continuing to level up. Um, and then have we talked about the fight with the twin?
I don't think so. I think we glanced over it because I got events flipped up.
Oh yeah, but yeah. So he finally has the duel with her after, I think, after meeting the mob squad the first time, right?
Yeah, right. It's right after they got back because she's like,
So
"Hey, you owe me."
yeah, which that was part of the deal of going to the fort. And the bugbear Foxy or whatnot was flexing against against Orin, and they
Or
go and
CQ jumped in.
they go and they have their duel, saying, "Hey, I was in line first," and then she flexes, and he's like, "Oh, okay,
Ladies first. That's what I always say.
right, right," and so yeah, they go and they have their duel, and he very tactfully switches it to until one of us reaches zero, and not to the
Until
death.
death. Yeah.
And so they go and they have their duel, and it seems like he's about to win. And she was basically dancing him around to do some like pentagram thing to freeze him. And then the last moment, I think it was the ring weapon that he granted her in the quest allowed her to like paralyze him or
Yeah, to get the
whatnot.
extra like sneak and backstab and all that damage.
Yep, yep. And so she actually beats him, and he gets his
Get out of jail free card trigger to where he doesn't actually die. So
right,
she's super ticked. And then that was another funny dynamic of their relationship where, he said till zero and he was like, oh, that doesn't count because she really wanted to see if he died, if she would get XP or if her player kill count would go up.
right. But I think later she admits to him what was going on, and she said that his solution to the problem pretty much proved that he wasn't an NPC.
He's just a video game addict.
Yeah, right. Um, but yeah, it's easy to confuse hardcore gamers with NPCs, right? After you've immersed yourself in the world.
Yeah, that or you realize how hardcore of a gamer you are when you come back to reality and you're like, wait a minute, why isn't my blink working?
Yep,
Must be on
Yeah.
cooldown.
Cool down until I go back to my PC. Um, but yeah, let's see what's next. Um,
The arena fights, because we talked about the Oxarian hunts.
right.
It's kind of cool how after he takes them out, he's like, "Hey, go ahead, take all the meat, all the resources back," and then he does a lot of power leveling himself, where he can kind of just let loose and do a bunch of different stuff. Um,
Oh yeah,
and
but before that, no, didn't they run into some like early, like the first wave or whatnot, some early scouts before the arena? Because they did, I thought it was like the
uh,
first Oxarian battle, and then on their way back, um, his oh man, drawing a blank on his name. The noble contacts him and says, "Hey, nobody showed up." So then he's got to use his shadow clone to catch up to them, and he leads the
or that's towards the end. That's like right before our or before the two waves get there.
right.
I
Okay.
thought.
So arena fight. Tell us about the arena fight, Pete.
The arena fight was kind of cool because you get to see the mob squad in action. Though, granted,
Hmm.
they opt out at a certain point because Rastia is missing, which could be
Mm.
something as simple as a bathroom break, something IRL, or we find out later that it's a bunch of foreshadowing. But
Right.
anyway, they opt out. It's kind of a cool dynamic, and yet again, the players really invested a lot, and this is something that they wanted, so they're able to help. Also, it greatly helps Orin develop and train his troops because inside the arena you can't die,
Hmm.
just reach zero. And then we get to see Malkir, fight through the ranks, and I think he actually ends up challenging or getting to the end.
Yeah, he's the only one that ends up getting to the end. Everyone else lost to the soldiers because it was a progression thing, right? You got to face some of the
Yeah,
lower
yeah.
level soldiers.
Kind of follows
Then,
the NPC stuff, weaker, stronger boss.
and I think it was Bob the lieutenant was the last one they challenged before facing Rhino. So, yeah, the arena fight was fun. Um, they postponed the final match until later. Around that time, Goblin's Gorge reaches level 3 village, where the population of the settlement passes 200 members. It allows them to support up to 5 bosses, which they currently have 3 of, um, which at that time is Rhino, Kuzix, or Kuzai, and the Dread Totem. Uh, and then, yeah, increases the population growth rate, et cetera, et cetera. Allows for a whole bunch of upgrades, including a Chief's Haunt, which is kind of cool. And yeah,
Trying to remember what the third betrayal is, because I want to say that's what happens next.
yeah. So um, before that, uh, something that we talked about offline was when he went to promote Rhino,
Oh,
using
yep, yep.
how important it is for them to stay in character because he tries to use like direct game language mechanics with Rhino, and he pretty much just like locks up. So he has to go through and stay in character and say, hey, I can make you even stronger. And he's wise enough at that point to be like, I can't keep fighting you all the time, dude. So he makes him swear his allegiance to him, right? In
Yeah, yeah.
Annihilator's name. Which, up until this point, there were several times that he had to redirect or correct Rhino. So he swears his allegiance, and he makes the other new bosses swear their allegiance to him, kind of firming up that power structure there.
Oh, that was another cool dynamic back in the dungeon crawl where they're fighting the big boss and the dwarf starts to sanctify the shrine or starts to change it from the dark to the light. And she's like, "Oh no, help me! Kill him! I'll give you whatever you want." And he turns to her and he's like, "Say it in your deity's name." And she's like, "Ooh, you see, I can't do that." And
Right?
that's where it's like, you know, it's kind of a check or whatever.
Yeah, he got himself in trouble a couple times, saying something in Annihilator's name, where it's like, oh, I guess like I gotta really do that now.
Yeah, can't just
I
be
don't.
throwing it around.
Yeah, I don't think Annihilator will be too forgiving about that. So, but yeah, the third betrayal was, we find out that Goomba finally got her chemist set. She's been going to town, building up all these this flammable stuff and everything to make some boom booms, some grenades, and a whole vat of it goes missing. So the third
Oh,
betrayal
yeah, yeah, okay,
is
okay.
when the Dread Totem is sitting there in the mess hall with a bunch of people, and
One of the Foblins runs up with a
yeah,
thing of flowers, and they've been told to be on the watch for the stuff, and
right,
how to detect it from smell.
hmm smell of sulfur, and then runs up for a gift for the chief, and it blows up the mess hall,
Yep.
which he's already repaired once at this point.
Yeah, from Rhino's antics.
hmm And the uh, the goblin soldiers who are on patrol come running in afterwards, like, oh, we saw him run by, and they go through. It's like, you're by the breeder's den. Did you smell it before or after? Et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, oh snap! And all of a sudden, another boom, and the breeder's den, the thing that's
Man,
allowed him to recruit all these troops
and not
and
have to breed them all himself.
right, not to have to form this goblin harem that his girl Tika disapproved of, um, is now destroyed, and it's like the 11th hour before they're supposed to get attacked. Right after all this work and
Yeah.
energy, um,
This is where he finally loses it, and he's like, "All right, everybody out. If you don't leave now, area quest, you're going to lose a bunch of reputation with the clan, and on and on site, blah blah."
yep, yep. So people start logging out and taking off and everything. Um, and he's like, we don't need these travelers. We can do this on our own. Take them down. Um,
And that's when IRL, or at least in another chat room, they all of the players get together,
most of them.
and or yeah, most of them get together. That's another funny moment with they're the Greenpeace clan, and some guy pops in and he's like, "Oh, hey, is this the whatever convention?" And they're like, "No, that's spelled different. That's spelled like this."
Yep, yep,
Like,
yep.
oh, okay.
But yeah, pretty much. I think it was Malkir talks him into turning over their logs, where he's going to write a recursive algorithm to go through and kind of like analyze the time and dates, and
Yeah,
uh,
figure out
a-
who the culprit is.
yeah, and a lot of them are like, if nothing else, go clear my
Was
name.
yeah.
Um, so that's going on in the background, and yeah, and then so it begins. Um,
I think
so
that's where they're out on the Oxarian hunt, and he's already got his new bosses promoted or whatnot. He leaves Rhino back at the place to guard it, and I forget, it's like a ranger and like a tank esque guy that he promotes.
yeah, yeah.
Get to the five.
hmm Yep. His scout and his tank-like characters. So now they're up to 5 bosses, and yeah, the
Kadrick. contacts him, right?
Mm-hmm. And says, "Hey, nobody showed up," because I think he was napping after he did some last bit of power leveling or whatever himself, and he ends up using his shadow clone to catch up to them and coordinate the fight, right? Where
Or yeah, that was another funky spot. Sorry. Side note. He was trying to use his shadow clone, and Vic was trying to, or he ends up getting a nosebleed or whatnot, and Vic is like staring him down like you're not damaged in the game, and that's when we figure out Vic can utilize his take over his shadow clone because he essentially sticks his goblin fingers up his nose, which is kind
hmm
of weird. But then Orin releases the shadow clone, and then at this point, it's where Vic's been against Orin using it because his meat brain processor isn't designed to handle that. But then with this serious moment happening, Vic's like, "Hey, you can move faster as a shadow clone." And he's like, "Oh, I thought you didn't want me utilizing it." And he's like, "Yeah, well, this demands it."
yeah, I think you're
So he's
ready.
able to like teleport between the shadows and catch up. And
Well, between those moments, he spent a lot of time training and leveling up. I think it was like his mana manipulation and just like other stuff. And
oh yeah, when he was meditating and doing yeah.
getting ready for it. So yeah, they go and is it in that wave that he meets the trader that Tal had?
It's the
Or
second wave he meets the traitor. I want to say, uh, or well, so the first wave is really two waves, isn't
right.
it? Because there's a group that's like, oh yeah, we don't need the rest of them. Let's go on ahead. We're awesome, And then a
hmm
couple people start following her because they're like, oh, she knows what she's talking about. So we kind of get lucky, and they kind of sparse up or split the initial wave.
Right. Right. Um
And he catches up with his group, and he talks to them, and he's like, "Hey, what's going on?" And they're like, they have a scout. They said, "Hey, we saw him."
hmm
He ends up helping out with the fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Finally he like um yeah, he's just a good raid commander, right? Telling his players to or his troops to target the healers and take them down and um, pick them off, and eventually he lures away the more high level player through some
He's also
taunting,
their strategist.
right?
But yeah, and it's funny too for me because he doesn't use necessarily any game mechanics. She's like, "Oh, there's another boss. There's this or that," and he just like pops up and it's like, "Oh, hey, you looking for me?"
Yep,
And just
yep.
you know gets under her skin.
And she goes charging off, and then yeah, he goes back, and they're able to finally finish her off and get back and level him up. And he learns that I guess he doesn't learn there. I think he learns later that he's able to progress towards boss tier 3 by sacrificing players.
Oh, yeah, yeah, by killing players. That might be the very first engagement he finds out about it, but he doesn't
Oh,
really start utilizing it until the first wave here.
right, right. Um, so they get that first little skirmish out of the way. Um, able to res people, get ready, and then it's just him and his troops. And did we talk about his clever trick to sense when the players were getting close or whatnot?
Offline we did, but yeah, where he starts sending off goblins and then has them, return on a shift. And if they're late, return every 5 minutes. If they don't return within that time span, then they know, hey, they got trapped in the slow time.
hmm
So kind of like casts a net and is able to see which direction and all that they're coming from.
Right. And then yeah. So they're getting ready for the first wave. They go and get everybody set up, their troops like ready to hold the line and everything for the attack. And that's when we have the fourth big betrayal, right? They
Yeah, he
got
tries
everybody
to
lined up.
resurrect people, but he can't because there's an enemy in their midst
Yeah,
or
but
whatever.
that's after the rest of the
Oh yeah, after the first wave gets there.
and the explosions taking out all the troops and everything, and he
Yeah, okay,
uses the
okay.
chalice for the foblins to turn them into these demon
Little
suicide
berserker,
bombers,
yeah.
right? Um, but yeah, he was it he's able to fight them off and everything, and then oh, what was it? He they oh Kedrick contacts him, right, and says, "Hey, we know who the betrayer is, the person who sabotaged us."
Oh yeah.
And he claims that it was Misa from the Mob Squad, and she recruited the Bugbear and the Half Dwarf, and that Penelope
There
or Raceland, or what's her name?
are Raistia.
Raistia is going after them to find him, and he finds Raistia near the
She's like
cemetery.
laying in the bed of flowers or whatnot.
Hmm.
Oh man, the connections right there were it was beautifully done. It was like
It
we
was.
heard he's slowly piecing it together. Or anyway, so he gets caught in the trap. It turns out that it's Racia or whatnot. As he gets closer, she like smacks all the flowers and throws up all the pollen in the air. He quickly teleports out, so he's in a coughing fit or whatnot. She's got this impression in her mind that this goblin is what is causing her cousin or her uncle so much despair and messed everything up. And we get to see Orin kind of piece it together because he's like, wait a minute, flowers. She mentioned she used to have flower picking, and then you see the connection between him in his old guild and his lieutenant Vatrus's uh, niece or whatever who had flower picking level 53.
Hmm.
And we saw a snippet of that in first book, but then he's finally puts it all together and calls her out by name, and then that's where she hesitates and she's like, wait a minute, what, where did you hear that, how do you know?
Yeah, and her quick mind pieces it all together. But yeah, and then she gets turned into a double agent, right?
Yeah, which is another fun or cool spot for her because she wants to become this different person. And she was the flower picker in the other version, but now she's this cat girl or whatnot.
Hmm.
And then I think he has her log, or he wants her to log out so Batrice doesn't know she's a double agent. But she's like, "Oh, after you figure out who I was, I'm no longer hatred, and you can resurrect, your people."
Yeah, but
But he doesn't get to.
because the second wave's there,
Yep.
and at that point, he literally just has like two of his five bosses up. Um,
Yeah.
that's pretty
Yeah.
much what's left.
Oh man, epic battle at the end.
Yeah. So,
Big pill and oh, I forget the other guy. Anyway, the Batriss's two head cronies who were supposed to also get the prime badges end up leading or being with the expedition as well, which is
yeah. So they have was it three or so? Well, no, they have in the in the second wave they have 200 plus level players leading a group of guild tryouts, right?
yeah,
To
yeah,
help take down this goblin camp. And yeah, sorry, going through my notes real quick. Um,
And a funky part when he's got the cloud of darkness or whatever that's around him, and that's where they can't really see, they can't really get through all the debuffs or whatnot they're getting, and that's when they look over at him and they're like, "Hey, so you could deal with this very easily." And he's like, "Yeah, I could." Okay, this is the last time I'm helping you. This is a tryout for you guys, not for me.
oh, you talking about where the Dread Totem gives them a quest to turn on uh, on the ally players or
No,
whatnot?
no, no. When Vatrus's higher up guy casts a spell to kind of dissipate some of the darkness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then it's a little bit later after they go and interact with the Dread Totem. He's like, "Hey, I'll offer you all this awesome loot and stuff if you guys turn and help interrupt his spell." Um,
Eh, and then like one guy gets out of line and the other higher up just like assassinates him. And he's like, "Well, nice try. I hope you all know if you go to the other side, you lose or you're
you're
no longer
disqualified,
qualified." Yeah.
right? Want a little bit more loyalty, which the irony of him talking about loyalty right after
Yeah, I'm betraying him.
mhm mhm
And then I think that's when we meet Tal's contact also, because he goes and he says, "Hey, I need you to lure these other guys out."
that was before the second wave, but
Oh,
yeah,
okay, yeah,
Tal's contact really comes through um and helps them divide and conquer and take out a handful of players using his treasure sensing ability or
yeah. He
whatnot.
made he pulled something out of thin air.
Right, played both sides until the end. um but yeah, by the time the second wave comes around, uh it was looking pretty grim there.
Oh yeah,
Um,
after not being able to resurrect our guys and
hmm
seeing that the big pill and the other guy were with them and
right. And going back to Vic, we find out that Big Pill's familiar is one of the VI leaders.
Yeah,
Um,
that he's supposed to defeat to help, with the BI pool so that
hmm
they
Yeah, so Vic freaks out about that, and it's just like kind of like, okay, here we are fighting for our lives, trying to do all this stuff. What do you really want me to do? Um,
and I think this is another big point where Orin, this item that he's been saving since Annihilator, where he found the Outrider bracelet to bring one of them to this plane of existence and attack. And
hmm
that was his, saving grace, even though he doesn't have all the stuff he built up for his, bosses and whatnot.
hmm yeah, but the the players on the Goblin side basically find out who, or at least Malkier finds out who is the betrayer, and in the final hour, the players show up, right?
Yeah.
Which was the last little push they needed. And then the racial hatred. You have the half dwarf priest healing up the Dread Totem, Orin there, and just talking about how awesome it feels to be fighting with the Dark Shrine or the Dark Temple behind them, and they managed to kind of turn the tide of the battle around, and it got to the point where Big Pill and the assassin guy are basically like, "Hey, you know, this isn't our problem." They throw down the oh,
Teleportation or whatever. It's where it sets up a portal. They end
mm-hmm,
up running.
yeah, and finally
Battress. Yeah.
Vantress shows up, right? And we had the Outrider out fighting around. Vantress shows up, and Vantress is literally
Or
is it
Batrus?
Vatris? Sorry, I know I keep trying to add an N in there. Um, he's literally one of the top 100 players in the game as far as power level goes.
Yeah.
So here he is, and he's pretty much just brushing off everything they're throwing at them, taking out on this Outrider, um, trying to get Orin to see reason and come back to the guild and basically work as
A
a
butler.
quest. Yeah, a quest butler, I think is what they called him. Just giving out quests, and he's like, you can either come, uh, you know, nicely, or we have this slave collar, and we could do that.
Oh,
So,
yeah, yeah. I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic because you think he's just going to come in and obliterate Orin, but because he's got ulterior motives, because he's kind of at the end of his rope, not getting the prime badges and his guild slowly falling, and
right,
this, that, and the other. He's, kind of shrugging off all his attacks and not paying any mind to it. And it's like, hey, well, your character isn't governed by normal player rules. We can enslave you. We can, do this. And yeah, we get to see, I think, oh yeah, Malkir is a distraction. And he's like, oh, hey, what's going on over here? And it's like, that's not going to do anything. And he's like, oh, I wasn't supposed to. I'm just the distraction. You get the Outrider to, do like a full power hit on his head or whatnot, attack him.
yeah, I think it was Rhino, right? Didn't he give him his axe or whatever to use?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. For Rhino to then pop up.
Right.
That was another cool moment with Rhino. How are you still alive? And it was because of the ring. And then we get to see that Beck's like inside his armor.
Yep, yep. You know, pick up puny goblin, tell him to heal. Talks about making him a little basket or something
Yeah.
to carry around. That would be that would be I could see a video game doing something like that for a boss mob,
Yeah. Um,
carrying around a little healer.
and then so we have that moment of despair again where Orin gets trapped in the imprisonment pearl,
Hmm.
and he's got his win con, which is to get his target below 50% health. That way
Right,
he can use his new decked out staff to
right.
sacrifice him or whatnot. And we're so close, we're at 50%.
Got to get him below 50% for it to work.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what the final thing was or how. Oh, there's another funny moment where Vatrus is about to drink a healing potion, and
Hmm.
he's like, "Oh, he must be really falling on hard times if drinking $1,000 potion or whatnot gives him pause."
Yeah, yeah. And they're going and they're going, and it's his dire ball. He concentrated on channeling the dire ball into his staff, and what was it?
Oh
I think it
yeah,
was
yeah. He his
Rhino that grabbed his legs or whatever, right, and brought him down just a little bit, maybe. Um, but
Anyway,
yeah.
so he's right on the threshold. He finally gets below the 98%. He's charging up his multiple spell castings and his staff, which was
Hmm.
another cool mechanic that I really enjoyed. Um,
Things like, Have you gone deaf? What is your answer? And then um, Dread Totem quote. Finally, I finished charging my three spells. I looked up at him with contempt and spat. My answer is this: I'm a fucking Dread Totem, bitch, and you stupid travelers won't stop me. Then I stabbed him with my staff, and several things happened in rapid succession. The epic staff passed through their energy barrier effortlessly, um, and basically like pierced his armor. And all three dire balls rushed inside his body and exploded.
yeah, which that
Yeah,
was another cool game mechanic for me where the imprisonment pearl level stopped Orin from being able to do anything, but because he had that artifact level item, the item was able to go through. So
Yep.
that was that final, ray of hope after we're, you know,
Good old game
losing.
mechanics.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So they saved the day. He ended up getting literally 5 level ups from that, which makes sense. He was facing a guy over
200.
level. Well, no, he was over 300, I think.
Oh,
Vantress was
yeah,
over
yeah, yeah.
300. Um, so yeah, they survive. They
Get their
get
last stand buff and all
yep,
that to help
yep,
rebuild everything.
yep.
Um,
Vic's not too happy with him because the familiar got away.
yeah, yeah. Which, he's pretty much like, hey, I tried, and, at least now we know where he's at and all
Exactly.
this. Um, oh, Vatrus is, in despair because he's like, holy moly, I lost, 5 levels or something crazy.
Oh, no, it was 5% of his levels. So he was formerly level 310 and he was now level 295.
Oh, dang.
So he respond losing 15 level, which amounted to over a year of progress and thousands of dollars. So not only has his betrayal of Orin like backfired up until this point, the fact that he didn't just cut his losses and move forward, he literally lost like a year of in-game playtime, or at least progression.
Yeah, yeah, and he still wants to go after him again, and that's where his seconds and commands are like, no.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty much their downfall, right? Because he's no longer in the top 100 players. They don't have the prime badges. They just lost to a freaking goblin.
Goblins, now they're the laughing stock on all the forums.
Yep, yep. Um, but
Then
yeah,
for a reward, he decides to get his goblin groove on. That was a big spot at the end where he's trying to like see the metadata in the baby inside Tika, and he keeps
oh,
trying to
that's
grasp at
right.
it, and he can't quite get any information. And then finally, oh, I forget the line, but pretty much it's like the promised child, or um,
Yeah,
you
Child of
know,
Fate or something like that.
yeah, yeah, that sounds right. Child of Fate, and I'm like, oh my, how quick they grow, and having it's weird because I don't know if the him being a player is going to have any effect on it. I don't know. I can't wait for
Yeah,
book 3.
yeah. So, a couple snapshots from the epilogue. We talked about Vatris. Um, we get a snapshot of the mob squad um, working their way towards the capital and talking a little bit about this quest, another quest that their dread totem's given them. And Racia has a magical device or whatnot to use. And then we also get to meet a 3-star general meeting with Neo's company and talks about how they have 20 subjects playing in accelerated time, with 90% of them showing normal mental capacity. And just, a lot of back and forth from the general demanding results and just kind of like, what does this mean? As well as, little snapshot of the VIs asking what's taken the deliverer, aka Vic, so long.
Oh,
Um,
was that book 2? No, okay, that was book 1. Never mind. Where Vic has that dialogue with the god,
yeah,
where he's changing oh his person of worship over to Annihilator, and the god comes up and he's talking down to Orin and like, why should I grant you this? Blah 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 blah.
yeah,
And then Vic's like, oh hey, how's it going? And then it
yep,
gets like a British accent and
yeah,
whatnot.
yeah. And a little bit of explanation about how gods kind of have different rules where they can still remember that they're VIs and not just play to the puppets.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, at the beginning of the book, I think the Dread Totems, at least early 20s, if not high teens in regards to level. And at
Yeah.
the end of the book, he finishes level
45, right?
50, or yeah, 45, boss tier 2, um, whole slew of different skills and spells and traits. Um,
And we've got a bunch of void crystals, and we've got our last
yep.
stand buff, and got a bunch of things going on.
I really enjoyed book 2. I felt like it scaled well. I felt like it was more balanced between the world building and the character development and the settlement
So
development and action. Um,
yeah, it kept me very engaged. Oh man, I'm glad we finally got a little more of the other players involved,
yeah.
and then you get to see a lot of the back and forth.
hmm Final thoughts on book 2?
Great book. Can't wait for 3. And yeah, yeah, stuff.
Nice. I'm with you. We're planning to do next Geek Out session next Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern, and that is July 21st. And that is going to be the Life Reset Hobnobbing book summary or the author summary for Life Reset Hobnobbing. Having survived the first wave of invading players, Orin now seeks to strengthen his clan. With the Breeder's Den destroyed and most of Goblin's Gorge's resources devoted to rebuilding, his best hope lies in creating an army of golems. But for that, he needs Viridium, a rare metal that can only be obtained from hobgoblin towns, where Orin and his clan of goblins are viewed as nothing more than potential slaves. To make his way in the game and to defeat his former guild, Orin's ingenuity alone will not be enough. He'll need to conquer his deepest fears and tap into his inner monster. And yeah, hope everyone will be able to join us for that. Pete, I look forward to geeking out with you next Sunday.
Yeah, I'm excited. There's still so much potential. Kind of like from book one, he was a 300 plus level character. Just now, we're barely hitting a like 40, 45 area, even though he's a
hmm
boss, and bosses, scale differently. But seems like there's still a lot of potential, a lot of development and growth.
Yeah, and so much of Neo that we still haven't seen yet,
Oh
right?
yeah, because all the area that was created due to Orin being, in that area.
hmm I think we'll actually get to see some of that in book 3, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks everybody for geeking out with us. Looking forward to geeking out with you in our next session Sunday, July 21st at 9 p.m. Eastern.